being able to serve the Lord today. And again, we're walking through the Word of God together as we're in our daily Bible reading. And we're in the book of Ezekiel. And I was in a different passage studying something, so let me get turned back to Ezekiel here. And we're in chapters 28 through 31. Ezekiel chapter 28 through verse 31 this morning, as we're looking at the Word of God. Again, we're continuing with Ezekiel, and he is giving prophecy or judgment. And we dealt with the people of Tyre. Now remember, Tyre was the country that supported David, that supported Solomon. And to be quite honest with you, if you study in history, it supported a lot of different countries and became very wealthy as a result of that. And so we see the prophecy against Tyre. And as we get to chapters 28, we're going to deal with the fall of the prince of Tyre, and we're going to look at the lamentation over the king of Tyre. Now, the Tyre is a symbol of the world. And as we look at this in chapters 28, we're going to see a reference here to Satan and his glory and what he was, and he was created perfect and a perfect being, but had a desire to be greater than God. And we see the fall of this prince and where he fell and how he came down. And they'll bring him down to the pit. In verse number 8 it says, "And thou shalt die the deaths of them that are slain in the midst of the sea." And so God looked at this, and he ultimately sees, and he spoke about the fall of Satan here. And that's in verses 1 through 10 of chapter 28. When we get to verse number 11 down through verse number 19, we see the lamentation for the king of Tyre. And notice that it says in verse 14, "Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, until iniquity was found in thee." And then we see how his voice and what he's about. He's about violence. He's about tearing down. And it talks about how his heart was lifted up because of his beauty, because of what he was. And God makes the reference of what happens to him. He cast him down. And so we see this prophecy, or this revealed to us, of the prince of Tyre. And it basically is dealing with that prince, dealing with Satan. When we get to verse number 20, we see now the judgment on Sidon. And in verses 20 through 26, he basically dispels what happens to Sidon. Now, Sidon is in reference to a city that's close to Tyre. And as we look at this, we see here the judgment that is given. When we get to chapter 29, Ezekiel changes his thoughts and his prophecy, and now focuses on the people of Egypt. Now, I just want to give you some background here. Egypt was still a main player in the world at this time, even though Nebuchadnezzar was beginning to overtake the world and was going to ultimately dominate the world and be the greatest leader in the greatest country that ever existed. Egypt was still a main player, and Egypt was powerful. But God begins to deal with Egypt. Now remember, many of the Jews that were left back in Jerusalem left and went to Egypt instead of staying there like God wanted them to. And so Ezekiel is now pronouncing judgment upon Egypt. And he deals with, in chapters 29, the certainty of judgment. In other words, he says judgment is coming. It's coming to Egypt. Egypt is going to pay for all of its iniquity and all of its things that it's done. And so as you read this, kind of look at what's going to transpire or happen with Egypt. And then in chapters 30, there's a description of the judgment. In other words, the things that are going to happen to Egypt as a result of this judgment. And chapters 30 deals with that. All of it deals with Pharaoh, deals with the people. And so we see the results of their what's the word I want to look for here? their desires, their actions, and as a result of that, these are the judgments that come. And so you say, well, Pastor, what can we learn from this that can help us in our daily walk? Well, you and I are no different than any other person. And when we must do what's right, we must follow God. We must build a relationship and allow Him to work through us. Not us doing the work, but allowing God to work through us. And so we see this. And then in chapter 31, we see the comparison that's made. Ezekiel makes a comparison between Assyria and Egypt, and gives us that comparison. And as we look at this in chapters 31, we're going to see how they're compared to each other and what transpires. So as we look through the Word of God today, we're seeing this prophecy that Ezekiel's giving. And matter of fact, to be honest with you, the rest of the book of Ezekiel deals with prophecy. Now, some of the prophecy we're going to see from Ezekiel as we get into this week is going to deal with the new world and a new heaven, and what's going to transpire and what's going to happen, and the results of certain countries in prophecy that's going to come and give us some indication of the end times. And we're going to look at that, because we'll finish up Ezekiel this week and then the beginning of next week, and then we'll be into the minor prophets as we deal with this. So as you're reading the Word of God and as you're allowing it to speak to you, understand what Ezekiel's saying. He's giving prophecy, but he's also giving us indication of things that we need to be careful of and that we need to watch, and we need to make sure that we put God first. So I hope that you'll do that. Hope that you have a great day today as you read the Word of God. Allow it to speak to you in Ezekiel chapters 28 through 31. And of course, we will pick up from here tomorrow when we get into the Word of God again. And we're going to look at tomorrow the lamentation over Egypt. In other words, the crying out to Egypt. And then we're going to get into some of the other prophecy dealing with Israel, the restoration and how they come back, and how Ezekiel's been appointed to be the watchman for this. And so we're going to look at those tomorrow when we get into the Word of God. Well, I hope that you have a great day the rest of the day. And remember, keep God first. Keep on keeping on for Him. And we love you. We want to see God use you in a great way. And let's be focused on serving Him,